and natural disasters. Despite this, women are too far and few between in the spaces where they can make a tangible difference and help chart a clean energy future for all of us. In boardrooms, senior management roles, and technical careers in the energy sector, there are just far too few women. That's why, in 2016, we started Women in Renewable Energy Network, the WIRE Network, to empower women in order to build up leaders and diversify and accelerate the fight against climate change and for a clean energy future.
My name is Angela Rainford, and I'm the Managing Director of Recamniar Frontier Ventures, which is a founder and shareholder of the Eight Rivers Energy Company.
And yeah, we'll have to do a little bit of cable management.
Yeah, I see some. So we are currently standing at the Paradise Solar Farm, Paradise Park, and it's a 37 megawatt net, 51 megawatt peak solar farm. It is the largest solar farm in Jamaica and one of the largest in the Caribbean. So the plan.
I'm Liz Thompson, Barbados's ambassador to the United Nations. I was Barbados's Minister of Energy for some time, and I'm passionate about energy issues. And as Barbados's Minister of Energy, I also developed Barbados's first national energy policy, which was intended to transition us to 30% renewables. In addition to that, I led the development of Barbados's National Green Economy Policy, which was the first national green economy policy in the Western Hemisphere.
Hi, my name is Lisa Speakers. I'm a licensed electrician here in Puerto Rico. I do electrical work as renewable energy in the solar field. Women electrician here in Puerto Rico, we are 18 women out of 5,500 male electricians. So we're not even a 1% female electricians. That gender balance, it's not helpful because we need more women in the industry.
My name is Julissa Trump, and I work at New Curaçao Wind Park, and I do the operations. At the beginning, it was a challenge because whenever you enter a meeting room, they were like, okay, somebody came with a secretary. While you're not a secretary, you are just one engineer sitting along with them at the table. At times, it is difficult because they want to challenge you, like, okay, show me what you know, and then we will listen to you. I think it's really rewarding, you know, especially once you've actually achieved the project and you've brought something to fruition. And it was more evident, especially when other women started to come up and say, hey, I view you as, you know, someone to look up to or mentor, or I want to do something like that, or hopefully they'll do something greater than that. And so that's the point when you start to realize that there aren't a lot of women in the industry when they recognize you as being someone who's kind of trailblazed or done something a little bit different. And that's super rewarding.
I like the WIRE program because the woman in renewable energy, it's the future for women. We need more women prepared in this area.
And a pleasant good morning and welcome to our panel on strengthening gender integration for fast and effective climate action. We are engaging in Climate Week, New York, and it's happening during this week, ending tomorrow. And we are very pleased to bring you this panel, and it is brought to you through efforts of the Women in Renewable Energy Network, which has transitioned from the Clinton Climate Initiative to RMI, with 570 members and 80 alumni through our mentorship program. RMI is super excited to take on the WIRE network and to continue the momentum to ensure that we have a just energy transition that is critical to fighting climate change. Of course, we have become quite used to a hybrid approach. And so while some of the panelists are joining us remotely, I am really happy to be joined by Miss Anita Otubu, who I will introduce with some more detail as we proceed. Just to feature what we will speak about today, we will start with welcome and introductions. And I think that's important so that we know who we're speaking with, because believe me, the panelists are esteemed panelists joining us today. And I'm really excited to hear some of their reflections on the topic of strengthening gender integration, but most importantly, some of their suggestions on how we could strengthen that gender integration as we move towards a just transition. And then we move to a panel discussion. And of course, we want you to be a major part of this webinar. So your questions are important to us. We encourage you to use the chat function. My colleagues are there to field these questions, to monitor the questions that you're asking. Please feel free to field questions. I know that from the registration list, we have folks joining us from all across the globe, as gender integration is certainly not just a matter from the Global South, from where both Anita, myself, and some of the other panelists are from, but it is in fact a global issue. And then, of course, having enjoyed all of that interaction, we will close off our webinar at 2 p.m. So today, our panel consists of Her Honor, Senator Elizabeth Thompson, and she is the Deputy President of the Senate of Barbados. We're also joined by Ms. Anita Otubu, who is the head of the Project Management Unit, Nigeria Electrification Project. We're joined by Ms. Monica Maduekwe, who is the founder of Futru Technologies Limited, and might I add that both Elizabeth and Monica are current WIRE members, and Anita has just joined today. And we're joined, of course, having a discussion on gender integration needs a male voice, needs male voices. This push towards a just transition is everybody's business. And so I am very pleased to introduce Mr. Raul Alfaro Pelico, who is a senior director in the Global South program at the Energy Transition Academy at RMI. And of course, I am your moderator and facilitator for today's webinar, Ms. Charlene Bodley. First, I am a proud member of the WIRE Network, but I'm also a manager with the Energy Transition Academy at RMI. I mean, really, we're facing so many challenges where gender is concerned. And some of them we speak of among women. Some are not as evident as others. But one thing is for sure, women and girls are the most vulnerable to climate change impacts. And that is true in particular for regions like the Caribbean, because the Caribbean is at the forefront of the negative impacts of climate change. In fact, Hurricane Fiona, I believe, is here to remind us of that, unfortunately. And my thoughts are with those in the Caribbean who have suffered from the adverse effects of Hurricane Fiona. And because women are the front line of climate change, and we know that clean energy is a solution to combating climate change, it really is mind-blowing that women globally only hold 32% of renewable energy jobs. Might I add that this percentage looks even more dismal when we think of Global South regions. We think of Africa, we think of the Pacific, and these regions are most certainly more vulnerable than others. And then if we have to take a deep dive into that figure and into that data, we would find that even with a 32% of women holding jobs in renewable energy, much of that number is actually focused on admin positions as opposed to technical areas or STEAM fields. A male-dominated sector from research, so this is not just me saying this, but research has shown that a male-dominated sector is likely to encourage more investment in oil, gas, and even coal at a time that we really should be accelerating this energy transition. However, on the flip side, which is more of an opportunity out of this major challenge, the participation of women favors renewable energy investments. And so with that, I introduce our first panelist, just giving a little more information. Her Honor, Liz Thompson, who is the Deputy President of the Senate of Barbados and Barbados's Ambassador for Climate Change, Small Island Developing States, and a Law of the Sea. She advances national and regional interests in these areas through bilateral, multilateral, and international engagement. She has been involved in advocacy and policy issues around environment, climate change, sustainable development, and the international policy agenda since 1994, so a lot of experience. In 2008, she received the UN's top award in environment, sustainable development, and climate change, which is Champion of the Earth. So let me just welcome Liz, our Champion of the Earth, and I will move right into question number one. Liz, we've heard so much of the great work that you've done, and incredible journey. And so I think you can be counted surely as a woman leader in this area. Given your own journey in climate and energy, you're also a citizen of a small island developing state. Can you share with us what you think the main barriers that inhibit the participation of women in clean energy are, and why is it key to support a just transition?
Thank you very much, Charlene. Hello, panelists. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I think that for this purpose, one of the key things is that I've been a minister of energy and that I am actually trained in energy. I have an LLM in oil and gas and renewable energy. Why is it difficult to get women into the sector? And how can we change it? I think those are the crux of your questions. Let me share, because I don't think that the public quite recognizes how bad it is in terms of the women in the energy sector. You shared at the beginning that 32% of jobs in renewable energy are taken by females, and the majority in administration. In the oil and gas sector, it's 22%. But this is part of a wider problem. And I went to some general data, which I want to share with you. The World Economic Forum tells us that in Asia, it will take 195 years to close the gender gap. Pre-COVID, it would have taken outside of Asia, the rest of the world, 99.5 years. Post-COVID, that has moved to 135.6 years, and the gender gap in politics would have taken 145.5 years to fill. In relation to STEM, and I want to refer you, those of you who are interested in doing further research, not only to the World Economic Forum data and information, but to the McKinsey study called Women Matter, to their study on the energy sector, both renewable and oil and gas, but oil and gas in particular. In the entry-level jobs for women in oil and gas are 33%, 41% generally in STEM, and 48% in the corporate sector. Only 25% of UN member states have a female ambassador. 81 UN countries have no female representation. And at the level of female representation across the globe, it's at just about 25%, both for MPs and ministers. So I'm starting to frame the question or the answer as a broader question than the energy sector. And therefore, I think that strategies to address this have to relate to how we deal with women in society. Do we just have gender departments within a ministry that sees policy after it has been developed?
Or have we established gender departments across the spectrum of government so that before policy is developed, the gender lens can be placed on it to determine how it will impact women and girls? We know from studies done by Ernst & Young and by McKinsey that female-led companies outperform those led by their male peers. They have better balance sheets, they have better financials. Women perform well as leaders. We also know from recent memory that during COVID, the media repeatedly highlighted that the countries that appeared to be doing best in their COVID response were female-led countries, including Barbados, I might add, with pride at the performance of my own prime minister. So do we need to develop within companies specific human relations, human resource strategies and targets to fill posts? 57% of our graduates are female. Therefore, why is it that only 15% of them are getting jobs at the level of engineers, for instance? And that is a genuine statistic. Do we need to develop gender strategies? Have governments got to use a greater level of moral suasion with the private sector? Does the private sector recognize it has a problem, and how might it be persuaded to recognize that? We also know that when women have opportunity, it creates opportunity not just for themselves, but for families. They tend to teach their children what they know and to educate them. So the transformation in using renewable energy isn't just that here is a new sector that is emerging in which there is more substantial investment now than in oil and gas, but a sector is emerging in which we can give women jobs so that it makes a difference to the quality of life of citizens, to all the little children, the little girls in Africa who are picking up firewood to cook with. It makes all the difference to the girls in Asia who are Muslim, who need energy, access to energy and water in order for them to go into the school environment, because when they have their period, they must have access to these things, and therefore they stay home for lack of them, as well as social and gender biases. It makes all the difference in our region, the Caribbean and the Western world, where women, particularly post-COVID, have been more disadvantaged in an environment where poverty definitely wore a female face. So what I'm suggesting, and I'm going to pause here because I really want to hear the perspective of others, is that patriarchy is a world order. How do we change it? And that I'm quoting someone. That is not much as I think it's a fantastic statement, beautifully articulated. I cannot claim it as my own. I believe it belongs to Dr. Cynthia Barrow-Giles. But the question remains, how do we address the renewable energy sector to effect the just transition, to have the kind of targeted approach to the climate crisis that we need, to create social and economic equity, and to ensure that we move from destructive fossil fuels to the renewable energy sector? And it has to do with deliberate, strategic, objective being pursued within the energy sector itself, but in the broader sector, because the data clearly shows that we have a wider problem that is national and international, not just sectoral, even though the energy sector is particularly, the problem is particularly poorly manifested there, or particularly acutely manifested. So thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to engage with all you bright young people.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and kudos, of course, to your Prime Minister and other leaders like yourself across the globe. Just 2 points here that you mentioned that I must summarize and highlight. One, that this gender integration is everybody's business because it does affect the bottom line. In fact, you mentioned Ernst & Young and the McKinsey studies, and they show that on average, between 30 to 40% increase in profits is gained when you have a team that is diverse, and particularly gender diverse. And your other point here being that we need these overarching changes, because gender is not, the gender gaps are not unique to the energy sector, but we have numbers here showing how long it will take to close some of these gender gaps. Really, numbers don't lie, and that is, it really leaves an impression. I want to move on to our next panelist, who is right here with me, Anita. We've been chatting all morning about gender integration in the energy sector, and Anita Otubu is the head of the World Bank African Development Bank funded Nigeria Electrification Project Management Unit. She is a qualified lawyer and a certified project manager with professional experience in electric power, oil, gas, and climate change. She currently heads the project management unit, as I mentioned, of the Nigeria Electrification Project, which aims to accelerate the private market for development of mini grids and captive power plants. And I could continue and continue. Maybe just last to note, she's also a member of the advisory board for Sustainable Energy for All, the Universal Energy Facility. Anita, once again, welcome. And so my question to you, Anita, and we've heard from Liz, there are huge gender gaps, obviously, and we're starting to cover the conversation towards, looking at what these strategies for change are. What do you think are the key entry points for gender mainstreaming that will accelerate a clean energy transition? Of course, please feel free to bring in some of your own experiences as a woman in the sector. And as a part two to that, what are the capacity development needs of women associated with these entry points? Again, what are the main entry points for gender action or mainstreaming to facilitate that clean energy transition, to accelerate it? And what are the capacity development needs of women associated with these entry points?
Thank you. A very loaded question, a very important question. You said numbers don't lie. So data is a critical entry point when we're talking about gender mainstreaming in energy transition, when it comes to energy transition, when it comes to energy access. So for example, if you want just energy transition or energy access sort of outcome, it's essential that we understand the needs, right? The peculiarities and of the various, whether it's the various countries, right? Sorry.
No,
I just
go ahead.
Okay, so data. Let me start again. So data is very important. Once we understand what the needs are, we're able to produce equitable outcomes. So having a comprehensive database that understands the amount of women that have access to power or reliable and clean power. Once we understand these numbers at both national and local levels, we're able to we're able to drive a just energy transition globally, right? And we're able to ensure that gender mainstreaming is, sort of factored into our approach in implementing our our energy transition plans. Secondly, it's important for us to strengthen policies, to strengthen regulations, where we're able to ensure that gender protection and gender participation, is incorporated into our energy transition plans. It's really essential that those policies and regulations are put in place in order to do this. Thirdly, I would say in our design and implementation of our projects and our programs, it's important that we identify the needs of the women, and we put in certain indicators to measure, the number of women, for example, who benefit from renewable energy projects. So, for example, ensuring that we measure how many women-headed households or MSMEs, are receiving reliable power supply from renewable energy projects that are put in place, as well as M&E frameworks that includes these sort of indicators. It's important that we build capacity amongst women, or capacity for women across the value chain. So we're talking about the technical aspect of things. So for example, women who are in the business of installing solar home systems. Some might say that, or as a woman, you can't climb a pole, you can't climb, a rooftop in order to install these PV panels. But women can actually do anything, provided they're given the essential training, right? You can also train women as it concerns the administrative aspect of things. So for example, a lawyer getting the necessary training as it concerns development of power purchase agreements, even policy development, regulations, and so on, and other legal instruments relevant for the energy transition or energy access sort of drive. I would say that it's very important to note that it's not just training in the traditional sense of sitting down in a classroom, being taught a particular course or whatever, but giving women the opportunity to shadow leaders in the energy space as well, right? In addition to that, giving them the opportunity to take on acting roles. So for example, where a head of a project, renewable energy project, is on leave for whatever reason, giving the women the opportunity to sort of act in that person's absence in order for them to get a taste of what it's like to work in the space, and for them to understand that they can actually do the work as well. These are key entry points for me if we're really talking about ensuring gender mainstreaming towards the energy transition. So number one, just to summarize, because I know I've been all over the place. I think it's because of the very long interview that we had earlier. The need for data. Secondly, the need to strengthen policies and regulations. Thirdly, the need to ensure that projects and programs take into consideration the needs of women. And with that being said, ensuring that you incorporate indicators to measure performance in terms of those women who are getting access to power, or reliable clean power as a result of these energy transition related projects. And as I mentioned, in order to ensure that women play a significant role across the value chain, it's important that training in the traditional sense, as well as in the non-traditional sense, is provided for various positions. You don't have to be an engineer,
And I think you're an excellent example of that. By training, you're a lawyer, certified project manager, and your CV certainly speaks for itself. So just taking some of these main points that we need training and capacity development must be along the entire value chain where renewable energy is concerned. Another really good point coming out from what you've said is the evidence-based approach, which is also supported by Liz, who spoke first. You can't change what you can't measure, right? If you don't know, then you can't change it. And Liz spoke about the increase in that gap because of COVID, these external shocks that we don't account for. And we had an issue where women's economic contributions are not easily measured, they're undervalued, and they really stay off the books. And so solutions are much easily responding to the needs of men as opposed to women. So thank you, some really great points coming out of that response. Thanks so much, Anita. And another woman in this sector who can testify to some of what you've said, Miss Monica Madwekwe, and she is a founder, some change makers in this space. Monica is a founder of Putru Technologies Limited. For over 10 years, Monica has specialized in developing West Africa's sustainable energy market, working with the private sector, working with government entities through various capacities, covering renewable energy, energy efficiency, gender mainstreaming, and finally resource mobilization and project development, all key ingredients for this transition. And that was with her time at Ecowas, at the Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. She moved from ECRI into the technology space, founding Putru Technologies Limited.
May I have your attention, please? This is the fire and life safety. Individual.
And we seem to be
Thank you for your cooperation.
just receiving some fire drill information. Technology does that, the virtual space does that. We all become embedded in each other's environment. So my apologies, we're just going to continue. So Monica moved from ECRI into the technology space and is a founder of Putru Technologies Limited. And that company disrupts the traditional capital raising and investment process in Africa's energy market, bringing businesses and financiers together, a gap that must certainly be bridged. So Monica, I mean, it must have been quite an experience for you as a woman in this field, not only through your 10 years service at the center, but also going brave and starting up your own tech company. I imagine you raised some eyebrows. So it'd be nice to hear about your experience. And we know that women's experience as intense users of energy in households may make them more effective as renewable energy entrepreneurs, as business women. Can you share with us some of the key challenges faced by women entrepreneurs and what strategies can better support women starting businesses within the renewable energy space?
Thank you very much, Charlene. First, I would like to congratulate the other speakers. They made some very interesting points. And basically, if you ask any female entrepreneur what challenges she was facing, they would summarize it as lack of access to capital, lack of access to finance. But from our experience in Ecowas, we see that there are three categories of women. And depending on the spectrum you fall as a female entrepreneur, your experience is different. So if you're at the upper spectrum, these are women that are successful business women. They are very savvy. They are doing very well, very strong balance sheets. They compete with men, actually. Then if you're at the lower end of the spectrum, you have female entrepreneurs that are just looking for technical assistance to develop business plans. However, we have the majority of most female entrepreneurs like in the middle spectrum. And in this spectrum, you have women that are not looking for soft support. They're not looking for anybody to teach them how to develop business plans. They've been in the business for some time. They've made some profit. Now they're looking for capital to scale. And in this group of women, we tend to see gender factors really featuring strongly. And one of the issues concerns the business women tend to be involved in the energy sector. Now in West Africa, we did a study where we looked at what sectors, subsectors in energy, renewable energy, women were actually involved in. And majority of women are involved in selling energy products like solar home systems, bulbs, solar lanterns, cooking stoves. Now these businesses tend to be less capital intensive than male-owned businesses. And this is an issue because these businesses don't need a lot of money. They just need a few thousands of dollars. And when women want to raise capital and they go to commercial banks to ask for loans, asking for a few thousand of dollars, nobody really wants to attend, those kind of requests because banks tend to want larger size transactions. The larger the transaction, the more money the bank can make. And as you know, if you're in the finance sector, whether it's a few thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, the bank will spend equal amounts of time and resources to do their due diligence. So it doesn't make sense to spend all that time doing due diligence for small small transaction size. So, and women won't want to go to microfinance. I mean, that is usually the last option. But this microfinance banks tend to charge far more than the typical commercial banks. So we tend to see women entrepreneurs not being able to scale because even though they might have that experience, they've made some, benefits. There are not many options, many financiers looking at those kind of small size transactions. So you kind of remain at the same level you've been for some time. Now, we implemented a project, an Ecowas project, to help women to scale, to enter new markets, because we spoke to these women and they are very ambitious. They want to do new things, they want to do big things. But again, we see gender factoring in because banks will ask for what balance sheets you have, what track record you have, what managerial experience you have. So women are constrained by the current positions they are in, the current asset size. You see that because they've been involved in cook stoves, they cannot just immediately catapult into mini grid businesses and large scale businesses. So you tend to see them just being there, finding it difficult to scale. The other issue concerns having women who want to, for example, get equity capital. Most women you tend to see go for debt. It's not just women. Most entrepreneurs in our region tend to go for debt capital. This is because going for equity comes with other legal, challenges. Investors will come with terms like drag along terms, which means that if your business is underperforming, they can liquidate that business. Anita here is a lawyer. I'm sure she knows what sort of contracts and investors can come with very stringent terms. So women don't really have that many options in terms of how to mobilize capital because of this fear of private equity firms coming over and liquidating the business over time. In terms of solutions, I would say based on the experiences we've had, I see blended finance really helping a lot because the commercial banks are willing to support women-owned businesses as long as there's development finance coming in to serve as a buffer, sort of. So you have development finance instruments like first loss instruments, which means that if the women were to default, for example, the money won't be the loss of the bank. So you have guarantees, you have grants. These are instruments that really help women mobilize some capital. However, these solutions already exist. The only challenge concerns the fact that we need to increase scale and the rate of transactions that actually go into supporting women. The other solution I would say is partnership building. So as I talked, about the fact that women are not really able to jump into, bigger transaction size projects or business activities. However, if women are able to work as partners in, larger scale projects, just satisfying some products and services, women are able to gradually build up their track record and experience. And when they're able to, when they now want to go and raise capital, they are able to show that yes, indeed, they have that kind of experience. So I will leave it at here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Monica, and an interesting topic. In fact, I'm here thinking that this really should be the focus of our next webinar, access to finance and women in the sector. But to try to keep time, I'm going to move very quickly to our sole male participant and panelist today, Mr. Raul Alfaro Pelico, who is our Senior Director at RMI, the Global South Program, and in more detail, leading the capacity development efforts through RMI's ETA, which is the Energy Transition Academy. And without going into too much of his bio, I mean, Raul brings over 20 years experience in this field, and he has held both managerial and technical roles at several multilateral organizations, including the World Bank, United Nations, the International Finance Corporation, and the Inter-American Development Bank. Raul, welcome, and thanks for joining us. And your question today, Raul, is, research shows that a male-dominated sector is likely to encourage more investment in oil, gas, and even coal, as I mentioned in my opening, while research also shows that, on the contrary, a sector that reflects a more equal participation or equitable participation of women favors clean energy investments. What are your reflections on this, particularly as a male in the sector, and how critical is the active involvement of women in renewable energy project development?
Thank you so much, Charlene, for bringing me into this very rich discussion. I am very fortunate to be sharing this panel with so many distinguished men and women in the energy field, as well as in climate action. And as you mentioned, my sole participation as a man in this panel is actually reflective of what actually happens when women and girls are bearing the brand of climate change. Conversely, when it comes to trying to take actions and make decisions to find solutions, it does happen that perhaps, if lucky, only one woman is part of that decision-making out of 5 people. And so I think there is a big responsibility for men to revert those figures. I certainly echo the panel's discussion so far on the need for data. You've mentioned the 32% of women participating in renewable energy. That compares with 21% of women participating in the oil and gas sector. While the figures are low, at least it shows that there is also an opportunity to, revert those figures and bring the figures closer to parity in clean energy. I think the other big highlight of this, these figures, is that when you think about what those figures are based off, is that you will find that a lot of that percentage of women participation is on non-technical, non-STEAM or non-leadership positions. It is critical that that trend is reverted. When you look at boardrooms, and in fact, CEOs that are men versus women, you always find that perhaps 3 out of 4 people are men in those boardrooms. And if women are not part of that decision-making process, then it's very hard to revert those figures. So that's mostly in the in a corporate world, in a context of a company. The panel has also discussed about the role of women as entrepreneurs. A recent study from the International Energy Agency that was released last week actually confirmed that in Africa, as well as in Asia, women are the biggest entrepreneurs in energy access. It is critical that we enable that entrepreneurship, because the focus shouldn't just be on employment, which is important, and bringing parity in terms of representation, but it's also in encouraging entrepreneurship and bringing, seeing women not just as employees, but also as employers. And just quickly, in terms of some of the solutions that companies have found in this space, and this is research from the International Finance Corporation of different companies that have successfully engaged women in decision making. One of the key things that companies have done is, you actually have to manage the bias, both conscious and unconscious bias. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you have to choose between 2 equally qualified candidates, and one is a woman and another one is a man, then go for the woman, because in the absence of that, the unconscious bias leads to choosing a man. I think the other part that is part of this decision-making process is, and I think it was alluded earlier in the discussion, is that when developing policies, when thinking about job descriptions, when thinking about, they have to be gender responsive, they have to be gender sensitive, so that actually women feel encouraged to participate in those processes. I think there has to be a targeted outreach to women, the very few women who have the bravery to actually face a very male-oriented sector, to actually encourage them to apply, and certainly include women in the panel, in the selection panels, because oftentimes you have lots of men like myself making decisions for yourselves. That needs to be reverted. I think those are some of the examples that are happening in the in the corporate world, but most importantly, when it comes to the evidence that the IEA and other studies show, is that the more women are engaged in the solution of the energy transition, the faster we can get to net zero by 2050. Thank you so much. Back to you, Charlene.
Thank you so much, Raul, for that. Most certainly interesting to hear a male perspective on this and encouraging at the same time. I'm going to move on to round two. So I'm going to go back to Liz. And Liz already started speaking about what needs to happen. I just want to narrow in on something you said, Liz. You know, we know that climate and energy policy makers who fail to take into account women's needs will fail to leverage what can be considered a powerful opportunity for fast tracking this clean energy transition. And you started speaking about the need for policy, and we heard it from other panelists. Can you just tell us perhaps what policy and strategy interventions must be developed and implemented to level the playing field for women?
Yes, certainly. I did speak to some of them. I talked about moral suasion on the parts of governments. Raul was very, very articulate and very good in talking about advertisements that are sensitive to gender issues, having female balanced interviewing panels. Apart from that, looking at quotas, what your HR strategies are, what your hiring policies and hiring strategies are. For instance, when the UN advertises for posts, particularly at certain level, it does say specifically that they are looking to recruit female candidates and candidates from developing countries, so that you know that they are opening the door to those to whom it has been closed for some considerable time. Gender lens on policy in terms of your HR, your corporate HR strategy and policy, and at the level of government. Really, it just means bring a gender lens to what you're doing so that you open the door. There was a very interesting study done. I'm going to close on this because I know the time is going and others must speak. There was a very interesting study done by Boston University in which they discovered that exceptionally well qualified women were not getting jobs, and they were trying to understand what was the basis of that. And Raul spoke about conscious and unconscious bias. And they did what was supposed to be a closed study, where the interviewing panels were given the information. They were not told whether the candidates were male or female, and they were interviewed. It was a blind interview. They couldn't hear the voices. And and every time the men emerged as the dominant number, the ones who got the jobs, etc. And the people who devised the study wondered what was going on, because the women were by far more qualified, had done better interviews by their, what did you call it, when they do a balance to check, I don't remember the term. And in the end, when they reviewed, they had to let the women go into the interviewing space barefooted, because the people who were doing the interviews were hearing the high heels of the women. And that is how the gender bias was emerging. And once that was eliminated, then the bias was, and women were getting the jobs. But as soon as the interviewers knew that they were dealing with female candidates, there was an immediate bias or prejudice that they were not even themselves aware of. So we are talking about something that is really very entrenched, that has been studied, and that we need to deliberately and consciously strategize to change. And I think both Raul and I have suggested some of those strategies and suggestions, as have the other panelists in their own way, whether it's access to appropriate capital, availability of capital, support of other types, training opportunities being extended. We can do this together.
Thank you so much, Liz. I am very familiar with that study. Very interesting. Anita, I mean, I know you spoke about the value chain, and because of the work that you do, I'm just thinking about the whole project development process, because it's really something that is lacking, both men and women. We have not met our targets by far. What do you think? What are some of the strategies of involving women, say from a project initiation right down to project closing, stakeholder engagement, project design and planning, procurement? How can we involve women in these processes?
I think, first of all, promoting success stories. So women who are thriving in this space, in the energy access space, and putting their stories out there, that would encourage a lot more gender inclusion. Secondly, I'd mentioned training. It's important for us to provide training even to those who are yet to even enter into the workforce. So those who are currently in university, giving them on-the-job sort of work experience, whether it's for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 6 months, so as to encourage them when they leave the university space to actually get involved in this type of work. Because you find that there are even a lot of engineers who leave university and they're just like, I don't think, there's room for women to sort of thrive and participate in achieving universal access, whether it be in their country or globally. I think it's also important it's important for us to advocate for quotas. So governments, private sector companies, they need to be able to mandate for certain percentages of women in the workforce. So whether it be 40, 50, 60% women, whatever it be, those steps have to be taken, because no matter how you try and convince a man, or it could even be a woman, that women are capable of doing the work, whether they've been to Harvard or whatever, some people cannot be convinced. So sometimes you have to put in those sort of mandatory sort of requirements, policies, regulations that would enforce gender mainstreaming in the energy access space. I think it's also important to have that comprehensive database system that I mentioned as well, where you have a list, a comprehensive list of qualified women. You find where men would say, oh, we don't have an issue employing women, but our issue is finding women who are capable, qualified to do the work. Well, actually, there are a lot of qualified and capable women, but maybe they just don't have access to that data. So having that comprehensive database system globally, where you can identify women who meet up with whatever criteria you have in place for certain job opportunities. I also think it's important, and I'd mentioned earlier as well, to provide shadowing opportunities, as well as giving women the opportunity to act in leadership roles. I'm going back to the topic of training. It's not just about providing technical training, project management training, and so on, but even training in soft skills. We find that women tend to have an issue with regards to public speaking. They have this issue of having this imposter syndrome, where you feel no matter how qualified you are,
You don't cut it.
Am I really good for this role? Can I really do this work? You'd see a man that sounds a lot more confident than you, who may not even have the right answers to questions being posed, but the way in which they answer questions will make you even believe that that wrong answer is the correct answer, whereas the woman would have the right answer in her head, but just doesn't know how to articulate herself, or just isn't confident enough to speak. So providing that training for women to feel bold enough to step into various positions, leadership roles, whatever role it is. These are strategies that I think are essential for really driving gender mainstreaming towards energy transition and towards energy access.
Thanks, Anita. And you mentioned, that soft skills development and mentorship. And in fact, it really is at the heart of what we do at the Women in Renewable Energy Network. Let me take the opportunity while I invite Monica to answer the next question, to mention that we have launched our mentorship program for 2022. And I would just ask my colleagues to post the link in the chat, as the deadline is sometime in October, and we're encouraging mid-level women to join that program. Our business is really growing leaders so that we have more balance in decision-making. Monica, on that note, before I go to you, I'll invite Raul, because we know that climate change requires strong leadership, Raul, and we heard from Liz that in terms of leadership, we don't have enough women participating, or we don't have that balance. What immediate actions can be taken to encourage leadership, to accelerate equity in leadership and decision-making?
Thank you so much, Charlene. I mean, very quickly, empowerment. Everything that I'm hearing so far in the panel speaks to our focus on empowerment. As mentioned, training is part of that, but it's also then beyond the training, creating the encouragement for that kind of like leadership. And so this gender responsive workforce development, looking at managerial and technical levels, not just non-technical skills, encouraging, women and girls. And I'm saying girls because also from earlier on in the school curricula, you will find that there is already that inherent discouragement to pursue science, technology, engineering, and maths professions, start from that level. But also the entrepreneurship, so that people have, and women have the courage to, become employers. And that, I think, through mentorship, coaching, and advocacy in all sectors, not just in the power sector, but also in the finance sector, in industrial sectors. I think that's important. I think the WIRE network provides that kind of opportunity, and many other female, women-oriented networks in the energy space and the climate space to create that sort of like build that ecosystem where women feel encouraged to take that step forward. And then finally aligning that ecosystem building to some sort of like investment acceleration, I would call that, meaning as those networks get created, you will find that you might find women who are in different parts of the stakeholder groups that are part of the solutions. You may have people in government, you may have women in finance, you may have women in industrial sectors. As these different stakeholders, women stakeholders get together, they can actually, think of investment pipelines that can actually address the solutions that we find. Back to you, Charlene.
Thank you so much, Raul. And just to close with one last question, Monica, I mean, all the women on this panel are phenomenal, but you mentioned, the difficulty it is for a woman to have that courage, and we heard from Anita, that confidence that we need to step out and to become businesswomen. Any final advice or thoughts that you may have with women who are thinking of making that bold move, but are, one, constrained by some of the challenges we've spoken about, including access to finance, but two, also lack that confidence to do so?
Thanks, Charlene. I think that's a good way to close. According to studies, about 1/3 of the world's wealth is actually under women's management. Women are getting wealthier, even though most of this wealth lies in, with women in the global north, but we see the same dynamics that led to that wealth playing out in countries in the global south. And this includes education and women getting access to high-skilled jobs, women entering managerial positions. Women are becoming key investors. And the finance institutions, there are a lot of studies telling the finance institutions to begin to recognize women as an untapped resource for climate finance and financing renewable energy and investment. So there are a lot of women doing great things, and we've seen women who have been successful in other fields. I don't think the renewable energy sector is any different. So I will encourage women who feel that they don't have the confidence to just look at other women who succeeded and to know that education really unlocks a lot. Get yourself trained, just like everybody else has said. And even if wherever you are, they are not giving you the opportunity you need, somebody else will give you that opportunity. The main thing is for you to gain the skills and the visibility to show that you have those skills. You're going to be found out, because at the end of the day, as they say, money talks. So if you're going to be making money for your company, they will find you somehow. They will find you.
Thank you so much, Monica. And I regret that we do not have time for Q&A. I was really looking forward to engaging with our participants. Gender is certainly a hot topic. And I hope that this is just one of or the first webinar in a series of webinars that we can engage those out there. And you, esteemed panelists, once again, let me thank Ambassador Elizabeth Thompson and an honorary WIRE member, Miss Monica Madueke. And you've heard a great example as a businesswoman in energy, Mr. Raul Alfaro Pelico, Senior Director at RMI, and most certainly representing the men who support this movement. And last but not least, and right here with me, Miss Anita Otubu. Thank you so much for joining us. Please reach out to us in case there were questions, and because we did not get to the answer and question segment, and once again, my apologies. We do advise you, encourage you to reach out to us at RMI. Please feel free to visit our website, it's on screen, and encourage the women who are in the energy sector, particularly those working within the Caribbean region for now. And we do promise that we are on it. We are moving to expand the services of WIRE, one across varying scopes and industries and across varying geographies. But for now, we encourage you to share this application link with women in the sector who are working in the Caribbean. Once again, thanks for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.